Welcome to episode 313 of FBI Retired Case File Review with Jerry Williams. I'm a retired agent on a mission to show you who the FBI is and what the FBI does through my books, my blog, and my podcast case reviews with former colleagues. Today, we get to speak to retired agent Jerome Lorrain, who served in the FBI for 30 years, and Detective Lieutenant Shane Bozeman of the Jackson County, Mississippi Sheriff's Office. In this episode, Jerome and Shane review the investigation of the murder of Sarah Willard, a 29-year-old escort and sex worker from Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Sarah disappeared in November 2019, and the Pascagoula, Mississippi Safe Streets Task Force worked with the Jackson County Sheriff's Office to investigate her disappearance. The investigation led to a 54-year-old male residing in Ocean Springs, Mississippi, who had hired Willard to be his BDSM sex slave. The FBI Cellular Analysis Survey Team, CAST, was crucial to Jerome and Shane's resolution of this case. Jerome was assigned to the FBI's Jackson, Mississippi Division's Pascagoula Resident Agency. He led a Safe Streets and High-Intensity Drug Trafficking Area, HIDTA, task force, which investigated drug trafficking organizations, street gangs, and violent crime. Jerome was also the team leader for FBI hostage negotiators in Mississippi. Currently, he works as an investigator with the Sheriff's Office and is writing his memoir. He can be reached on his LinkedIn profile. Detective Lieutenant Shane Bozeman began his law enforcement career in 1998 and worked at a number of other police departments before joining the Jackson County Sheriff's Department in 2010. Shane was promoted to the Criminal Investigation Division in 2014, where he is currently assigned. His duties include supervising other investigators, assisting his captain, and overseeing the day-to-day activities of the Criminal Investigative Division, as well as investigating felony cases against persons and property. Now, a quick note before we get to the case review. I will be in Philadelphia at the end of April. I'm still trying to find a place to host a meetup event on Sunday, April the 28th, 2024. So if you live in the Philly area and you're interested in attending, please stay tuned. I promise to bring along lots of free podcast swag to give away. In your podcast app's description of this episode, you'll find links to where you can join my reader team to keep up with the FBI and books, TV, and movies, buy me a cup of coffee, and learn more about me and my nonfiction book, FBI Myths and Misconceptions, a manual for armchair detectives, and my 2 FBI crime novels, Pay to Play and Greedy Givers. All are available as ebooks and paperbacks wherever books are sold, and audiobooks on Audible and Spotify. Thank you for your support. Now here's the show. I want to welcome my guest, retired agent Jerome Lorrain, and Lieutenant Shane Bozeman of the Jackson County Sheriff's Department Criminal Investigative Division. Hi, guys.
Thank you, Jerry. It's good to be back.
Good morning, Jerry.
Yeah, the last time Jerome was here, we reviewed the case we called Miss Alabama Murder. That episode, as of today, is among my all-time top 25 downloaded episodes. So, Shane, you got to step it up. You don't want to bring Jerome down.
I know. I feel a little intimidated now.
No, Shane is going to do great.
All right. Well, you sent me some links for articles about the case that we are reviewing today. It's going to be about a woman that was murdered. And when I first started reading, and I saw that her husband, or I think you said her ex-husband, was the one who called it in, of course, I was immediately suspicious, which I'm sure a lot of our listeners who are into true crime would immediately think that the husband did it. So you had to let me know as you go along if that's what you both were thinking too. Where do you want to start?
I'll start with how we got this investigation started. It was 4 years ago in February of 2020. I received a phone call from our FBI office in Miami, and they advised that a 29-year-old woman named Sarah Willard came up missing. She'd been missing for approximately 3 months. Her ex-husband and her mother had reported her missing.
When did they report her missing? 3 months after she was gone or earlier?
They reported her earlier, but the FBI didn't get involved until the Coral Gables Police Department contacted the FBI in Miami because they thought it might have some human trafficking angle to it and or kidnapping. As you know, Jerry, the FBI investigates human trafficking, and in our major offices, we have whole squads. That's their sole focus. Part of the human trafficking that the FBI looks into is twofold. One is either sex trafficking, which can be adults or minors, or labor trafficking, which also can be adults or minors. With adults, usually there's some threat or force or fraud or coercion involved in these cases. With a minor, you don't have to prove that angle because a minor can't consent, obviously. The FBI has a very active role in these cases, and Sarah Willard was a sex worker. She was working in the sex industry. That's what initially got the FBI involved in the case, and that she had flown out of state from Florida and flown to New Orleans. So the Coral Gables PD was looking for federal assistance to investigate the case further. So initially, what we learned is that Sarah's phone had last been used near a residential home in Ocean Springs, Mississippi. We learned that Sarah had met an individual from Ocean Springs, Mississippi by the name of Philip Yark, who was a 53-year-old white male, unemployed. He was married, and she had met him on a BDSM website. They both had profiles on this website. BDSM stands for bondage, discipline, submission, sadism, masochism. It involves people that cater to the slave master sexual type relationship. And in fact, when we looked at Philip Yark's profile on this website, it stated that he was looking for a female slave, that he was into kidnapping, caging, blindfolds, pain, drugs, sharing, rented, and a dungeon slave. So this is the type of activity that he was advertising for. And a lot of people, obviously, it's role playing. It's not legitimate, quote unquote, slave master type, what you would think of relationship. They're just role playing. So we didn't know exactly what we had when we first got this call. We didn't know if it was going to be a kidnapping case or if it was going to be a sex trafficking, human trafficking case. And we didn't know if Sarah was alive, if she was being held in a cage against her will, or if she had just attempted to start a new life someplace with somebody else. But we were certainly concerned because it had been 3 months since anybody had contact with her and her phone hadn't been used.
Okay, so when I started all of this asking about whether the husband was suspected, that had long passed. That had been looked at and resolved before you even got the case.
More or less, the best lead we had was the last person that she was around. But I will say this as far as ex-husband, boyfriends, normally when you're dealing with sex trafficking and a woman's being trafficked, there is a man involved in some capacity, either as a pimp, there's some type of coercion, force, intimidation being used. So we didn't rule anything out at this point. But her ex-husband was cooperating, and he said that the last text message he had gotten from Sarah said that she had met with the client and that things weren't working out and that she was looking for an exit plan. That was a text message he got from Sarah, and that was on October 29th, 2019. So at this stage, this is the information we have. I contact Lieutenant Shane Bozeman with the Jackson County Sheriff's Department. I'm a coordinator of a Safe Streets Task Force, which is an FBI task force that involves state and local officers working in the FBI office with us on violent crime and drug cases. I was very familiar with Shane, and we didn't know if this case was going to be charged in state or federal court or what angle it might take. So I just asked for the Jackson County Sheriff's Department's CID, Criminal Investigative Division, to work with us jointly on this investigation. Once we realized that the last time Sarah's phone had been used at Philip was near this residence belonging to Philip Yark, we ran his name in NCIC and determined that he had spent 11 years in jail for a conviction of malicious maiming in Virginia. And that involved a case where he had cut somebody with a broken beer bottle at a party. So we knew that he was a convicted felon. He had spent time in jail. He was currently not employed, but he was married. So we decided to do what's called a knock and talk, where we go to the house, we interview the suspect, and we just see if they will admit having contact with our missing person. So that's what we did. This was on February 6, 2020. The FBI Safe Streets Task Force and Jackson County CID traveled out to his residence on Sweetbriar Street in Ocean Springs, and we knocked on the door. Philip Yark opened the door. He was a heavy-set, middle-aged white male. I told him that we were there on a missing persons investigation, and I asked if we could come inside and speak with him. He invited us in, and we sat down on the sofa. Myself and an agent by the name of Jason Default proceeded to talk to Philip Yark, and I showed him a picture of Sarah Willard. And I said, this is the lady that we are trying to find out what happened to her, and does he know her? Philip said that he did, that he had met her. He had met her on a BDSM website, and that she was looking to be in a slave-type sexual relationship, and that she had flown from Florida to New Orleans, and he picked her up at the New Orleans airport and brought her to Mississippi. At this stage, I asked if we could have consent to search his house. He said yes, because I was concerned whether or not she might be in the house. He said she was not in the house, and he gave us consent to search. And once he signed the form, the task force officers and Shane and Jackson County CID started to search the residence. Jason and I continued the interview with Yark. Yark claimed that Sarah had been groomed since the age of 13 for this lifestyle, and that she was in a bad situation with her ex-husband, and she was looking for somebody to take care of her. He had hoped that she could move in with him and his wife and stay with them. He denied having any sexual contact with her. He said that he drove her to Mississippi, and it didn't take long for him to realize that she was unstable, a manic depressive, and that the relationship that he wanted with her was not going to work out. He said he drove her to a suburban inn hotel in D'Iberville, Mississippi, and dropped her off and basically told her this isn't going to work. She replied, "Don't worry about me. I'm going to travel to Maryland or West Virginia. I've got a client up there. I've got a sugar daddy with an apartment up there who gave me a BMW, and I'm going to go up there." He said that was the extent of it, that she decided to go someplace else, and it just didn't work out between them.
And what was your feeling about what he was saying? Sometimes you get that spidey sense. Did you immediately think he's lying?
I thought some of what he was saying was the truth, and some of what he was saying was lies. We see that happen all the time because it's easier to tell the truth than the lie, so they'll mix in some of both, and it makes it tougher for us to disprove things when they're throwing in some facts that we can actually verify.
He had also learned through Coral Gables at that point that the ex-husband said that it was not unusual for her to take off on these type of trips and things like that and be gone for a while, but it was highly unusual for her not to keep contact with the mother and with him by phone. She had not kept any contact up to that point.
He wanted us to believe that she had just vanished, so to speak, that she wanted to vanish. She wanted to get away from the ex-husband, and so that she was okay. I let him speak. We wanted him to say as much as possible. So we continued the interview. Yark claimed that for him, it was not about the sex. It was about control for him, and that she wanted to be under somebody's control and live in a cage. So he thought it was going to work out. But once he met her, he realized that it just wasn't going to be possible. I told him that the last place her phone had been used was at his house. And he said that's impossible because she was never here. He said he did not hurt her. He never had any intention of hurting her, and he didn't wish her any harm now. And that's an example of how somebody will say some truths and some false statements. I felt strongly at this point, I think we all did, that he had done something to her, and he was trying to convince us that he didn't hurt her. But his last statement, I don't wish her any harm now. Well, he was trying to throw in a little bit of accuracy with it. I think he probably felt sorry about what had happened. We didn't buy his story at that point, and we told him so. He said, I'm going to spend the rest of my life in prison over this girl. At that point, he was starting to get worried, and I told him not necessarily tell us what happened. He said, I'm the last person that she was with. He took a deep pause. He started breathing hard, and I asked him if she was alive, and he said yes. I asked if she was in a cage somewhere, and he said no, I don't have her anywhere. I asked him if it was possible if he had blacked out and did something to her, and he said, I can't say no.
If you could explain to everyone why you asked that question that way.
A lot of times people will try to minimize a horrible crime, and the way they do it is by saying, I just kind of lost control, or I just snapped, or something blacked out. I don't know. Next thing I remember, they kind of do that leap, that bridge, try to get them over the horrible point back to where they're normal. So it gives them just a little bit of out. Could you have blacked out? Or was this something sexual going on? Maybe there was some asphyxiation going on or something of that nature and you blacked out. Or I was just trying to give him some escape mechanisms, so to speak, where it'd make it easier for him to say what happened. And when I asked him that, he said, I can't say no. And I said, well, did you snap with Sarah? And he said, not that I recall. And he said, I'm just sad right now. I wish it would have turned out another way. Then he caught himself and said, I'm sure she's still ticking along. I just wish I knew where. At this point, we'd been talking with him for several hours. He was close to breaking, but he just wouldn't get over the edge and tell us what happened to Sarah. We knew that there had been foul play after talking with him and the way he was acting and his statements that he had made. So we took a break. Shane and I talked, and he told me what they had found during the search, and I'll let Shane kind of discuss that now.
Yeah, during the search of the residence, we located 3 handguns. I believe it was 2 shotguns that we actually found in Philip's room that were actually just out in plain view, easy to see as soon as we walked in, the shotgun and all was anyway, and then we located the pistols and stuff in there. Well, knowing that he was a convicted felon and he was forbidden from possessing firearms at that point, we made the decision to go ahead and charge him with felon in possession of a firearm to get him out of his comfort zone a little bit, to take him to the station to give us a little bit better opportunity and more on our playing field, I guess you would say, to sit down and talk to him a little bit further. Because as Jerome stated, at this point in time, pretty much everybody there knew that he wasn't being completely honest with us and suspected that there was some foul play that had taken place. So that's what we did. We took him to the station.
I might add that Yark's wife was home, his wife and his mother, who was residing with them in a garage apartment. And his wife was interviewed. She said that she knew nothing about any sex worker or sex slave coming to live with them and that she would have never allowed that to happen in her house.
Well, Shane, let me ask you, since you were part of the search, did you find any apparatus or cages or any of that stuff?
Well, so we did during that search. We located the firearms. We also seized a couple of computers, and we found a black bag which contained some BDSM type material, handcuffs, blindfolds, things of that nature, which we also took at that point in time as evidence. It was almost as if, though, in speaking to the wife and to the mother, that they had no idea of this, I guess you could say, secondary lifestyle Philip was keeping on the computer and the conversations and things going on.
That is really interesting. They must have been in shock.
Yes, very much so.
At this point, Yark was transported in custody to the Jackson County Sheriff's Department, and approximately 11:45 that night, Jason DeFault and I met with Yark, advised him of his rights, and was basically just going to turn up the heat a little bit on him, let him know that we thought he was lying, and tried to see if he would confess. As soon as we advised him of his rights, he said, I'm done answering questions. So we didn't push him at that point. We'd been doing this for 4 hours or so, and we thought, well, all right, we'll let him get a night's sleep. We can revisit this later. We broke for the evening, and the next day, Shane filed the felon in possession of a firearm charge, and a bail was set.
Correct. The judge set his bail at $100,000 based on the fact that he had the weapons, the suspicion that there was some foul play involved and all that. Gave him a $100,000 bail, which Philip had told us that he wouldn't be able to make any bail at that point because he knew, due to his actions and the arrest and all that, he was pretty much knew that his wife was going to leave him at that point. And he even later made comments to her, just leave me where I'm at and things like that.
So at this stage, we needed to try to ascertain Sarah's movements from the time she left Florida until she ended up at York's residence. One of the ways that we do that is by analyzing cell phone records. The FBI has a team that's referred to as the CAS team, and that stands for Cellular Analysis Survey Team. And these are a group of specially trained agents that can analyze phone records and geolocations and try to determine where a phone was at for any given period of time. Agent Jason Default was a CAS team member, and he started analyzing the phone records. He put together an amazing report that showed her movements from the day that she flew out of Florida. She flew out of Fort Lauderdale Airport in Florida and flew to New Orleans. At around noon, she was at the airport in New Orleans, and then it showed that she was traveling towards Mississippi. And along the way, the phone stopped at a Circle K gas station in Slidell, Louisiana. And then it continued on into Mississippi. When it got into Mississippi, it went north of Bay St. Louis into a rural area and stayed gone for almost an hour and a half or so. And then eventually went to York's residence. And when it got to York's residence, the phone was only there for 4 minutes. And then afterwards, it went to the Suburban Hotel in D'Iberville, Mississippi. This would have been on October 29th, 2019. The next morning, October 30th, 2019, the phone moved from the motel to York's residence. And except for one brief turnaround trip to York's wife's place of work, the phone stayed at York's residence for the next 70 hours. And eventually, on November 2nd, 2019, at 5:36 a.m., the phone died and went off, and it never came back on again. This gave us lead information to work on. Agent Jason Default traveled to the gas station where they had stopped on the way, and he was able to get video and was actually able to get pictures of York getting out of a gold Subaru at this gas station, going into the gas station. We were able to get a description of the clothes he was wearing that day. And as he was walking from the Subaru, on the video, it looked like he kind of turned and may have said something to somebody in the car, but you couldn't see anybody in the car from the video. At this point, it gave us a lead that we needed to search the Subaru closely. And Shane, I'll let you pick it up from there.
At that point, once he was charged with the felon in possession, we were working that case simultaneously with Jerome and his team. We were looking at it as more of a possible homicide or something like that. Like you said, Jason Default created the graph, which basically gave me a perfect timeline of showing that she was in New Orleans at 12:02 and then where she traveled, which we found a little unusual because it's a straight shot from New Orleans, but they actually went north for that hour and a half, and we weren't exactly sure why that happened at that point in time. We later found out what happened with that. Whenever we realized that he was in the Subaru, because when we interviewed him back at the house, he told us that the truck was his. There was 3 vehicles at the residence whenever we went over there and did the knock and talk. There was a Ford F-150, which belonged to Philip York. There was a Mini Cooper, and then there was the Subaru, which belonged to Philip York's mother. Well, whenever we were able to ascertain that he was not driving his truck and he was driving the Subaru, we obtained another search warrant to go back to his residence, to search his residence again, as well as the other vehicles, paying very close attention to Mom's Subaru because we knew that that's what he was driving whenever he picked her up. In searching that vehicle, whenever we got to the back of it, it was a station wagon vehicle. So I pulled up the carpet and pulled up the spare tire. Well, in the spare tire well, we found what appeared to be blood. We did a preliminary test on it, which did come back to be positive for human blood. So at that point in time, we knew that foul play had taken place. There was really no reason for there to be this amount of blood in the spare tire well. We knew that something bad had taken place with Sarah, and we just needed to figure out what was going on. I went and served him those search warrants at the jail. I did it on camera specifically because I wanted to see his reaction whenever I gave it to him. So whenever I went in there and called him into the interview room and told him, we had executed more search warrants and gave him that. And I told him, I said, well, I found blood in the Subaru. At that point in time, you could just tell he was defeated. His head dropped. He was standing up because they just walked him in there long enough for me to tell him that and serve him with paperwork. I think he knew at that point in time that it was just a matter of time. He was defeated, took a deep breath, and the only thing he said was okay. And he turned around and walked out. So I knew at that point in time we were on the right track.
Yeah, and we had blood, but we had to prove whose blood it was. So at that stage, we had to try to get buccal swabs from Sarah's mother. We were also able to obtain a razor that Sarah had used in 2 cigarette butts. Ultimately, that was tested by the lab, and it was positively identified as being Sarah's blood.
Correct. Whenever I contacted Coral Gables and got more information on what all they had and stuff like that, I had him send me some pictures of Sarah. One of the pictures showed her tattoos and things, which became very important later on. But after serving him with that, I went back and spoke to his wife and explained to her what all was taking place and all of this. And she was very distraught because she had no idea of this different personality type situation he was dealing with. She says, I don't understand how he ever thought that he could bring a female in my house to be a slave. She said, I'm not into females and I'm not into any of that stuff. She was just totally floored by the entire situation. You could just tell by talking to her that she had no idea of what was going on.
And saying that, it sounds like he never intended to actually engage in these behaviors with Sarah, since we know his wife wasn't into it, that she did not want to have a sex slave in her home. So it sounds like his intentions from the very beginning was to do harm to Sarah.
It's possible, but whenever we were interviewing the wife told us that due to some medications and things that Philip was on, that he was impotent. They had not been able to have any type of intimate relations in several months, which we found kind of strange because he was on a BDSM sex site. But whenever we were able to go back and track everything, we later learned that whenever he picked Sarah up from the airport, the reason that they went the strange route, they were talking, getting to know each other, and he realized that she was not quite all there. Then he actually kind of came back to reality and realized this is not going to work. My wife is not going to go for this. What was I thinking? He tried to play it like he was just in a different state and not being realistic as to what could actually take place. He blamed that basically on the anime and things that he liked to watch and that he was into.
One important fact here is that on his profile on this BDSM website, he used a picture of a male between the ages of 25 and 35, a young, good-looking male. So he was kind of catfishing on the website and talking a big game, portraying himself to be a certain way, but it was all fiction. And I'm sure that created a major problem once Sarah arrived in New Orleans and she saw who she was, in fact, really dealing with. The next major thing that happened was February 12, 2020, is York's wife goes to the jail to visit him. Shane, I'll let you pick that up at that point.
Yeah, so she told me that she had set up I guess you could say, conference call. In our jail, you basically do it on a computer screen, basically like a Zoom type conversation. You don't actually sit in front of a glass and talk to them. It's more of a Zoom type conversation. So she told me that she had set that up and she was going to talk to him and then she was going to let me know what happened. Well, so I had already contacted our investigator at the jail and told him what time this was taking place and all that, and told him these conversations are recorded. The entire video and audio is recorded. So I told him if he would, as soon as he got in the following morning, to download that and put it in a location that we have on our computers, which is like a shared drive. That night, when she was talking to him, that investigator at the jail actually called me at home and he said he just admitted to killing her. I said, do what? He says, well, the investigator at the jail was actually working late and he was watching the conversation in his office while they were actually having it. So I said, he did what? He said, yeah, he just admitted to it. So he took his cell phone and put it on speaker and put it next to the computer so I could hear the conversation as to what was going on while I was at home. His wife asked him, did he do these things? Because she told him she was going to file for divorce. She point blank asked him, did you hurt that girl? And he said, yes, I did. At that point in time, we knew that he had killed Sarah. We just did not know where she was at. We went with the information we had, the blood, all the evidence that we had up to this point.
Let me ask a question, and I know the answer, but I just want to be clear for listeners. Even though he had said that he wasn't going to talk and that he wanted an attorney, I'm taking there are signs all over the Zoom type system that lets him know that whatever he says is being recorded.
Yes, it actually tells you when you log on our system anyway, it tells you that these things are recorded and or monitored.
So in a jail situation, there's no expectation of privacy for the inmates for their conversations that they're having, and that's for the security of the jail. The only conversation that they can have that would not be subject to monitoring would be with an attorney. And during that subsequent interview where we tried to speak to York at the sheriff's department, he didn't ask for an attorney. He just said that he was done talking. So potentially we could have gone back to him at some point, but he didn't specifically ask for an attorney. But in a jail setting, there's no expectation of privacy on the part of the inmates, and it has to be that way for security, because otherwise people could be planning to sneak in contraband, which they do all the time anyway. But it helps to secure the jail if they don't have that expectation of privacy for mail or phone calls. One other thing that York said to his wife during that visit was that everything good in my life I've thrown away, and I'm going to die in prison, and I'm going to commit suicide in here.
He said, I'm going to die in prison. I don't know what I was doing. I don't know what made me do this. And yes, then he said that he was going to die in jail and he was going to commit suicide. So I immediately contacted the jail and told them to put him on suicide watch, which they did. Well, during that conversation also, Michelle, his wife, told him I'd been very nice to her and to his mom and tried to work with them as much as possible, because in serving these search warrants, it takes time to do that on 3 different vehicles in the house and things like that. I tried not to put them out too much. We still had to do our due diligence, but I was very nice to them and tried to work with them and not making them sit outside and things like that. You know, we'd clear the living room, then let them sit on the couch while we did the rest of the house and somebody sit with them and with the vehicles and stuff as well. He told her on that conversation, he says, well, I'll talk to him. The next morning, based off of all the evidence that we had at that point in time, I coordinated with our district attorney and told them everything that we had, and I was able to obtain a capital murder warrant on Mr. York, despite the fact that we had not located the body of Sarah Willard. And you know that that's highly unusual to be able to get a murder warrant on somebody and not actually have the body. But we felt, and the district attorney felt, that we had more than ample evidence at that point in time.
So the next thing that happened once the murder warrant was obtained, it was a capital murder charge, so that makes it a death penalty eligible offense, is that there was some conversation amongst the investigators and the district attorney's office about taking the death penalty off the table if York would provide information that would lead to the recovery of Sarah's body.
Right, correct. So, yeah, during that conversation, they went ahead and we were able to obtain the arrest warrant for capital murder, and he was denied bond by the judge. But to try and help get the family some closure and things like that, they agreed to take the death penalty off the table if he would lead us to where Sarah was at. The district attorney's office received a phone call from the public defender's office, who Mr. York had reached out to them to represent him at that point in time on the possession of a weapon by a convicted felon. And so they were representing him on that. And the same day that we filed this new charge on him for capital murder, they reached out to the district attorney's office and notified them that Mr. York wanted to speak with me. I went up there on February the 13th and met with him at about 5 p.m. because I didn't want him to change his mind. And at this point in time, he pretty much knew the gig was up. So I went down, advised him of his rights again, told him that I had been told that he wanted to speak with me. At that point in time, he ended up telling me the entire story, that he had met Sarah on this BDSM website, and that, yes, they had only known each other for 24 hours. And then she flew to New Orleans where he picked her up. When he picked her up and they were riding, he kind of realized that this was a bad idea and was never going to work. And he knew that if he took her home, his wife was going to leave him because she wasn't going to stand for this. The reason that they went north was they started arguing, and he said that Sarah offered him sex, but he declined it. And he said that he felt like the only reason she offered him sex was so that she could be in control. And so he said the first time he declined it. But he said he was trying to talk to her and tell her that she just needed to go back home and this wasn't going to work out. And he said that they ended up stopping having sex, so really that he could get her attention. In the midst of whenever they went up north, they stopped at a park up there and ended up having sex, at which point in time he handcuffed her. Whenever they got done having sex, he realized he did not have a handcuff key. She had to ride a couple of hours back from where they were at, back down, and that was actually when he went to his house for those 4 minutes. He took her to his house. His wife was at work and his mom was inside. So he goes to his house and gets the key to the handcuffs. They leave. At this point in time, he's telling Sarah she needs to go back home. This isn't going to work out. Well, she starts threatening him, saying that she's going to call the police and that she's going to say that he raped her because he had already agreed to take care of her and basically let her be his slave. So he took her to the hotel and said, just stay here. Let me figure out what I'm going to do. Whenever he dropped her off at the hotel, he goes back home and goes to sleep. This was later on in the evening. He goes to sleep, said that he turned his phone on silent. And he said it was not uncommon for him to sleep on the couch because he was up and down all hours of the night. When he woke up the next morning, he had several messages from Sarah stating that she was going to call the police and say that he had raped her and that she had his DNA under her fingernails and his DNA from where they had had sexual intercourse. He said he kind of freaked out, didn't know what to do. So he went to the suburban lodge and picked her up and they went riding around. They continued to argue. He said that he pulled over on a side road and told her very forcefully to get out of the car. And he told me at that point in time that Sarah thought she was going to get beat, that he was going to physically beat her, and said that that was kind of what she was into. He got out of the Subaru, walked around to the passenger side of the car as she was getting out, said she started to walk past him, and when he did, he shot her in the back of the head. He then picked her up, placed her in the back of the Subaru and covered her up with a dog blanket that her mother kept in the car and went back to his residence and parked the car in the driveway, went back inside and went to sleep while his wife and mother were still in the house asleep. This was early morning hours. He essentially waited on his wife to get up and go to work. Whenever his wife got up and went to work, he then went outside and got Sarah's body, placed her in a black garbage bag, and ended up burying her in his backyard.
This does not sound like he thought or had any plan whatsoever. But let me ask you, who paid for the airplane ticket?
She did.
Wow.
Yes, this was not unusual. Her page basically correlated with his wants on what he wanted is to what she was also wanting. You know, the caging, food deprivation, basically wanting to be a slave. So they felt like that they had met each other by fate. Then whenever they did get together, he realized that this was a bad idea and there was no way it was ever going to work. And now he was afraid that he was going to lose his wife and everything that he worked for since he got out of prison. And even his mother was at the house. His mother would have never gone for it either, allowed him to have another human being and treat him that way at the house.
So when you first started talking about this, I made the assumption, and we all know that you shouldn't make assumptions, that the murder, the violence to her was part of this BDSM scenario. But it sounds like he was just a scared guy who was trying to hide this relationship from his wife. The normal thing that happens usually when a man kills a woman. I hate to put it that way, but we've heard this story so many times where the woman threatens to tell, and the only solution that the guy comes up with is, I got to get rid of her, which is quite horrifying.
In this case, the only two people that know exactly what was said and what happened is Yark and Sarah. It would not be unusual for a sex worker to be role playing and be telling somebody what they want to hear. And then in this case, person was talking a big game. And then when she gets there, she's been catfished. It's false advertising. But for most sex workers, it's not about the sex, it's about the money. And it would not be unusual at all for somebody involved in sex work to try to get more money out of somebody or extort somebody into keeping quiet about something. And this is Yark saying that she wanted to move in with him, but it's entirely possible that she was doing this just to make some quick money. Once she saw that this guy's wife didn't even know about this, there was no way. He was kind of scared of her finding out, that she thought she could make more money out of this deal and was kind of extorting him to get more money. And then he couldn't handle the pressure. He snapped. It doesn't justify it in any way, shape, or form, but only two people know exactly what was happening. Certainly York is putting the best spin on it that he can for his own personal self-interest.
We had been to this house and been there a couple of times, and we did not see anything really out of the ordinary. He also, during that interview, he actually drew me a map of his yard and his residence and pinpointed exactly where she was buried in the backyard. So immediately after he did that and told me what happened and where she was buried and all that, immediately I left and contacted our Jackson County coroner and the Mississippi State Crime Lab, which would ultimately have to come and exhume the body. What I did at that point, it was late in the evening. They weren't going to come. It's a couple-hour drive from the crime lab to get down here at that point in time because they were in Jackson. We found out she was buried at the residence. What I had to do is I went back to the residence and advised his wife and his mother that the property was now a crime scene. However, I still didn't want to put them out because I felt, they're victims in this as well. So I gave them the option. I said, you can go stay in a hotel room tonight, or you can stay here. However, you can't go outside the house, and I'm going to have deputies posted on your house all night long. And they said that they couldn't afford to go get a hotel room, so they chose to stay at the house. But we kept deputies posted on the scene all night long to make sure that no evidence outside the property or anything where she was buried at. I told the deputy where she was buried to keep a close eye on that. The following morning, the Criminal Investigation Division from Jackson County, the FBI, State Medical Examiner, and the Jackson County Coroner's Office executed another search warrant on the property to recover the body of Sarah Willard, which she was located exactly where he told me she was at. She was buried in the backyard under a window. She was partially still in a black bag, which there was some states of decomposition, which made her facial features, I guess you could say, hard to identify at that point. However, I was able to do a preliminary identification based off of tattoos that she had from the photos that I'd gotten from Coral Gables. I was able to, with certain accuracy, be able to say that, yes, that was her that we exhumed based off of those. That was later confirmed through dental records and the DNA that we gathered from her mother. We also learned that one of the weapons that we had seized on the first knock and talk we went over there was actually the murder weapon. One of the .380 handguns that we seized actually turned out to be the weapon that was used in the murder of Sarah.
Could you explain what you meant when you said she was buried under a window?
Yes. So he drew me the map of the residence, and there was a guest bedroom, and the window to the guest bedroom, she was actually buried right underneath that window outside in the backyard. So when he drew me the map, he said, there's a window right here, and she's directly under that window in the backyard. So we knew exactly where to go.
You would think that he would have buried her a little further out in the yard.
Exactly.
Or someplace other than his house. That's what we were banking on, because when we were looking at the cell phone records, her cell phone records, we were trying to determine where was it that he could have dumped the body, because most people wouldn't do it right there at his house. He did have a large backyard. He actually bought the lot adjacent to his house, so he did have a very large backyard. But where she was buried was right up next to the house.
That's really unexplainable.
Yes, it's a very unique case, that's for sure.
Oh, absolutely.
I will never forget whenever we were actually standing out there, our sheriff at the time, he came up to me and he said, Bozeman, you better keep all of your notes on this because they're going to make a movie out of this case one day. So
That definitely could be true. I did read some newspaper articles, and we know sometimes reporters don't have the inside information, and they're, like I've done as you've been talking, making some assumptions. But it did say that her ex-husband and her mother did indicate when they were still looking for her that she did have some mental issues.
Yes, her mother said that she was bipolar and she had suffered sexual abuse as a child. She had a pretty tough life, and there was also indication during the investigation that she was a drug user. She was self-medicating, as a lot of people, unfortunately, suffering from mental illness will sometimes do. And her mother was concerned that maybe she wasn't taking medication that she should be taking.
absolutely. Irregardless of things that they may do, she's still a human being and still did not deserve what she got.
It's a relief to know that she did have these loved ones who, once they knew she was missing, cared for her and contacted law enforcement in trying to find her, because it does sound like she had a very, very rough and very, very sad life. And it's really horrifying the way it ended.
Yes, it is. The next thing that happened, York hadn't been convicted yet, and he contacted the FBI and said that he had some really important information that he wanted to disclose that would help his case. One of our agents, Jason Default, went out to the jail to see what he had to say. And when Jason sat down with him, York said, "Let's make a deal." And Jason said, "What do you got?" And York said, "I know about drugs being brought into the jail." Jason thought he's going to disclose like other murders he's done. He knows where other bodies are buried, something big that he was trying to lessen his sentence with. And as soon as he said, "I know about drugs being brought into the jail," Jason looked at him and said, "No deal. You killed someone. You're not going to get credit for having information about drugs being brought into the jail. We know that happens. We investigate that all the time, but we're not cutting you any deal for that." So finally, on September 19th, 2022, York entered a guilty plea to first-degree murder and possession of a weapon by a convicted felon. He was sentenced by the judge to life on the murder charge plus 10 years on the weapons charge. Our district attorney, Angel Myers, gave a statement at the time of sentencing, and this is what she said. "This was a heinous crime driven by the defendant's selfish sexual desires. The defendant thought that no one would come looking for the victim. He was wrong. Sarah's life mattered, and today we got justice for her and her family."
Justice for Sarah. It's beautiful.
So it was 4 years ago today that Sarah's body was recovered at York's residence, February 14th, 2020.
Whenever we talk about these type of cases, I really concentrate on the investigation and hopefully giving people some knowledge about how law enforcement goes about investigating. But it's always important to remember the victim and to acknowledge that somebody lost their life. So I thank you both for making sure that Sarah, the victim in this case, that we've had a chance to get to know a little bit about her.
I hope we did justice in the conversation to Sarah because she had a really difficult life. It's easy for us to say, "I'm so good," or "this never would have happened to me." But some people, just have an incredible amount of trauma that they have to deal with. Unfortunately, sex trafficking, sex work is so inherently dangerous. And we see these cases happen all the time. It's so sad. And I'm sorry that she didn't get the help that she needed and that things could have maybe turned out differently. But, there's one person who's responsible for what happened, and that's Philip York.
I really, really appreciate the way that you've reviewed this particular case. So thank you. Can we take a little bit of time before I get into my standard questions to talk about the relationship between the FBI and the Jackson County Sheriff's Office? Because that's one of the things that I really try to do is to make sure people understand that old cliche about the FBI not playing well with others and coming in and taking over a case for the most part, because we all know that there are individuals out there that may not represent our agencies the way we want them to represent. Can you tell us a little bit more? I know, Jerome, you talked about your Safe Streets Task Force and how it handled drugs and gangs and violent crimes. So I'd love to hear from both you and from Shane about that working relationship.
I would have to say we have an excellent working relationship with the FBI. Had it not been for their help, they had the case at first looking from the sex trafficking standpoint and things of that nature. Whenever we charged him with felon in possession of a weapon, ultimately that was a state charge. If we didn't have that relationship, they could have just said, "Okay, that's a state charge. Y'all deal with it." But they didn't. Had it not been for their assistance in this case, I don't know that we ever would have solved it. Jason Default and Jerome were extremely helpful in this, in gathering information, and we stayed in contact. We do that on several different cases, not just this one, but anytime we have anything that we feel like meets that threshold to become a federal case, not just the FBI Safe Streets, but all of the other federal agencies. I know down here on the coast, we work hand in hand with them all the time, and we really do appreciate that.
Yeah, I'm not sure people realize how much the FBI actually gets involved on so many cases kind of behind the scenes. I mentioned the CAS program where we provide assistance to track cellular phone activity or computer activity. There's probably not any major investigation that's happening in the United States right now involving multiple homicides or anything that's a kidnapping, a missing person. The FBI is involved in the majority of those cases, particularly with the CAS team. They do fantastic work helping local law enforcement agencies solve these horrible crimes. So we can bring assistance to an agency that may be technical assistance that maybe they don't have the resources or the training to do. In my experience, the relationship between the FBI and local law enforcement is excellent, and it's kind of completely opposite of what you see on TV.
That's the truth. And I think I've shown that a number of times when I've been lucky enough to have a retired agent come on this show with their law enforcement partner to review a case. And I also want to say that I do have an episode coming up with one of the FBI agents who pioneered the cast technology. I hope to get that up and released shortly. Now we're at the point of the interview where I like to find out a little bit more about you. So, Shane, in your particular case, I'd love to ask you, when and why did you decide you wanted to get into law enforcement?
I pretty much kind of always had that drive to want to be in law enforcement, but I really didn't know how to go about it. So I had several other jobs once I got out of high school, mechanic, tow truck driver, things like that. And I really just kind of lucked up. I started back in 1997, kind of giving my age away. Yeah, I started back then. I had a friend of mine that worked for a small municipality in Alabama, and they were able to do ride-alongs at the time. So I went and started doing ride-alongs with him on my off time and just fell in love with the job. Actually, the chief and I kind of hit it off, and he offered me a job. When he offered me a job, they agreed to sponsor me and send me to the police academy there in Alabama. So I went to my first police academy in 1998. I stayed at that agency for a couple of years. However, it was a small agency and I was young and I wanted lots of action. So I ended up leaving there and going to work at the Mobile Police Department, where I went to another academy. And I have to say that I learned a great deal from Mobile. And then after, I think about 6 years there, I kind of started losing my drive a little bit and felt like I wanted to do something else. But I got out of it, got out of law enforcement for a couple of years. But I never lost that feeling. And as retired agents, y'all know it kind of gets in your blood. It's a calling. It's not just a job. So I had that calling and I ended up moving back to Mississippi, where I'm from, getting hired on with the Jackson County Sheriff's Department. I've been here for 14 years now and absolutely love it. Kind of took me a strange path to get there, but I'm very fortunate as to where I'm at now. I work with a great agency and a great group of people here.
Fantastic. And Jerome, I know we talked about it when I interviewed you for episode 262, but why don't you repeat and let us know again why and when you joined the FBI?
I joined the FBI in January of 1991. Previously, I'd worked as an accountant in the petroleum industry and I also worked in the insurance industry. Bottom line is I wasn't passionate about either one of those jobs. I always wanted to be in law enforcement and to have a job where you can make a real difference in people's lives. And you can make a difference in people's lives no matter what kind of job you do, as long as you're interacting well with people. But you certainly have a heightened, unique ability to do that in law enforcement. So I joined the FBI and never looked back. It was a great career. I'm actually working on my memoir about it now, and I hope to have that out in the next year or two. But I'm going to talk about a lot of the great cases we worked on the Safe Streets Task Force. It was just an honor to work with the FBI. It's a great organization. It was my privilege to work with Shane and many other detectives and police officers in law enforcement.
Well, I'm definitely going to make sure to have you back when that book is complete for us to review another one of the cases that you featured in your memoir. So don't forget me.
I'll be glad to come back.
I always like to give my guests the last word. So Shane, why don't you go first and then we'll hear from Jerome. What would you like to say?
Just to touch a little bit on what Jerome said, being able to do this job and make a difference. When the day that Philip York pled guilty, Sarah Willard's mother was there in the courtroom. She traveled here to be there for that. And once it was all said and done, she gave me a hug and she told me thank you. And to me, that is the most rewarding part of this job, to help change and represent the family. Of course, Sarah couldn't speak for herself, so somebody had to speak for her. And I felt like we did that to help change someone's lives, even when people are going down the wrong path and things like that. When you have somebody come up to you in a grocery store or something like that and say, "Hey, Lieutenant Bozeman, do you remember me? You arrested me, you put me in jail, but you helped me turn my life around," or something like that. I can pretty much tell you every one of them that I've had that happen to me. And that's why you do the job. That's why we work the long hours and the stressful days and things like that. But that's it. It's not to put people in jail. It's to try to make a difference. I thoroughly enjoy it, and I hope to be doing it for a few more years until I get to reach retirement as well.
I just want to say that it was a privilege and honor to work for the FBI. I wouldn't change a thing. I worked there 30 years. As we all know, the FBI has received a lot of criticism in the past few years. Some of it was just, but a lot of it is unjust, in my opinion. And every day the FBI is doing amazing work. Kidnappings, cases involving sexual abuse of children, serial killers, terrorism, civil rights, elderly people that have lost their savings from some financial fraud scam. I literally could go on and on and on. The FBI is a great organization. I tell people all the time that God forbid if their child was ever kidnapped, there's no other law enforcement agency in the world they should want working the case than the FBI. I worked a lot of kidnapping cases over my career. I saw amazing work that the FBI did to recover people that had been kidnapped or held hostage and bring the perpetrator to justice. So I love the FBI. It's a great organization. It's not perfect, but they're good people in the FBI. And if people really knew the type of work that they do every day, which your podcast certainly does a great job of highlighting, they would realize that we're blessed to have the FBI in the United States.
And that's the end of the interview. In your podcast app's description of this episode, there's a link to the show notes at jerrywilliams.com, where you'll find a photo of Jerome Lorrain and Shane Bozeman, case-related images, and links to articles about the Sarah Willard murder investigation. There's also a link to Jerome's other FBI case file review, episode 262, about the Miss Obama murder. I hope you enjoyed the interview and that you'll share it with your friends, family, and associates. You can show me just how much you liked it by buying me a coffee. There's a link in your podcast app's description of this episode, or you can visit jerrywilliams.com and tap on the little coffee cup icon in the bottom right-hand corner of my website. Don't forget to follow FBI Retired Case File Review on your favorite podcast app. Now, this podcast is all about true crime, but if you're also interested in crime fiction, once a month via my reader team email, I keep you up to date on the FBI and books, TV, and movies. When you join my reader team, you get access to my FBI reading resource, a colorful list of more than 70 books about the FBI written by FBI agents who have been guests on this podcast. There's nonfiction, crime fiction, true crime, and memoirs. You'll also get my FBI reality checklist, where I debunk 20 cliches about the FBI and receive news about what I'm up to and about my FBI nonfiction and crime fiction books. I want to thank you for listening to the very end. I hope you come back for another episode of FBI Retired Case File Review with Jerry Williams. Thank you.